ladies and gentlemen, and all incorporated transhuman algorithmic entities as defined by the European Union Court of Human Rights, live from the near future, in association with King Waspinator Studios, and filmed before a live studio audience in beautiful downtown Icon City, Total Party Skills presents yet another episode of America's Next Top Antichrist, with your host, King Krampus. And now here he is, the moment you've all been waiting for, King Krampus.
Okay, so the long story short version of this video is, basically, I think subconsciously there's a chunk of the MAGA crowd that wants a return to the old propaganda, more so than a return to America being great, because that's an abstract thing that's based on the propaganda, actually. They want the Norman Rockwell paintings turned into a real life as a commercial for food that you can buy on Thanksgiving, featuring an all-white family. You know, they want a square-jawed, tough-looking, muscular, straight white male Batman to beat the shit out of criminals. All that kind of shit. I think you can prove part of this by the fact that a leading factor that led up to Trump's re-election is the fan criticism sphere that erupted after The Last Jedi came out. They are the people who have been slowly but surely corroding the support and people's ability to suspend disbelief when they're watching film and television over the last decade. Maybe not everyone, because not everyone listens to their shit, but enough people have heard their shit and then spread those opinions into other people that it's had enough of a cumulative effect that it has had an impact somewhat on the box office returns of various movies, because they've been able to be painted as woke, and they've managed to paint wokeness as being uncool. And because wokeness became uncool, there's a certain amount of the youth center. A lot of the influencers were easily swayed over into going with the anti-woke option in the last election. And that's why you had a bunch of channels that might not otherwise have ever dipped their toes into anything to that level of politics were all excited and giddy to have a chance to have Trump or J.D. Vance on their shows. Not just, for the notoriety and the views and all that, but because he was representing the opposition to that which they now thought of as lame and uncool, which could have been mitigated from the get-go had Hollywood responded differently to the beginnings of that critical bubble on YouTube and other platforms. Channels like Geeks and Gamers, Critical Drinker, The Quartering, Ad Infinitum, there's tons of them. It's a whole little cottage industry that all was born out of bitching about The Last Jedi. That itself was an imitation of a small internet cottage industry that had been born off of a formula that John Campea had come up with for trying to treat movie news more like sports, so you're getting into the numbers of who's making what box office and all that kind of stuff. It's why modern right-wing movie critics are so focused on whether or not a movie was successful based off its opening weekend box office, not taking any long-term side-on merchandising and VOD views and people streaming it and all the money it'll rake in over the years as it remains a property that these companies can put out there and, rake in some cash and residuals on. But no, what it made in its first 48 hours determines its success or failure, because, well, that's what people like John Campea had kind of set up as the expectation prior to The Last Jedi. And in response to that and the way people reacted negatively to Ghostbusters, Hollywood wanted to double down instead of, adjusting their models to not upset a significant chunk of their fan base. This is in part the result of political intrusions into corporate lives that was caused by the Obama administration, because I don't remember what they originally called it, but there was stuff put into place that would start to, track a company's investability on the stock market indexes and all that kind of shit by certain factors about whether or not they have a diverse board of CEOs and employment and all that kind of stuff. Do they actually have any gay people? Are they trans accepting? Mixed in with the fervor over Caitlyn Jenner coming out. cynical rich perverts who are like, oh, cool, I can now just cross-dress at work instead of in private, and boom, I get to check off a box, and I get to be one of the diverse people on the board instead of one of the stingy old white guys. And other things that have happened. It's not quite as over omnisciently present as the right-wing people seem to want to act like it is, but it is there, and it gives these people ground to stand on, even if it's just a toehold, so they can keep lobbing eggs at the side of the building until it starts to stink, and no one wants to go around it anymore. Hollywood was also not well served by hiring people who had no experience and no idea what they're writing to write stories that were increasingly designed, and casting that was increasingly designed to antagonize and rub in the face of these people who were complaining. And that's not cool. Making bad movies and poorly written movies isn't cool. And by becoming uncool, you added yet another little slice of people who would vote for Trump. The thing about our way our party system is right now, at least for the last several election cycles, is that it is about nibbling away little tiny demographics from one another. You know, both parties have their hardcore people that are going to vote for their party no matter what, come hell or high water. So what you're really trying to do is trying to nab little 5%, 10% sub-target demographics. And if you can assemble enough of those to come over and take your side, boom, you got it. And that's what Trump did. And now, if the left wants to do that back, they got to figure out how to target the right little demographics to get them actively engaged, or just sit back and just count on Trump to alienate enough of his little 5% demographics to get them to turn. The cool people have a bit of a problem. They don't want to lose face and become uncool by admitting that they were wrong. So they can't just go back around and make something that they've decided to think of as uncool cool again, because the thing they thought was cool turned out to be uncool. None of that's cool, so they're all kind of trapped. You see this with some of the comedians around Joe Rogan and shit like that, you know. Some people way overblow. Like, you know, like this is all some like Rogan sphere conspiracy to help manipulate things. Like, these are all little tiny nudge effects being generated by a bunch of things happening all at once. There's no singular explanation. There's no singular thread. No one is in charge. Everyone's just reacting naturally to stimuli and then generating their own stimuli by how they're choosing to react, as it has always been. But the people on the right who are nostalgia tripping, both politically and in terms of the entertainment they want, I mean, like I said, really what it comes down to is, you know, like, you can't just up and wave a magic wand and make America great. I mean, how are we defining great? What do you even mean by that? That's super fucking vague. But one thing that you can consistently say has been a contributing factor, and opinions that they express parrot-like on the internet all the time nowadays about how they react to various news from the entertainment sphere, is that's what they really want. At least that's the tangible thing that they can get their hands on. They want state and media propaganda that tells them that they're good guys and everything's fine and it's all everyone else's fault. You know, they want to be heroes. They want to see themselves as heroes, because as dumb as it is that for some reason people can't seem to empathize with other human beings if they don't look identical to them, we seem to be stuck in that world anyway. And you can hardly blame this entirely just on a generation of young white dudes, because other people of other groups make the same statements of, oh my God, I finally feel seen. It's like, okay, fine. I guess I never enjoyed any movies I ever saw that starred black people, or any Asian movies I've ever watched, because since I don't look like them, obviously I can't grok in any way any sort of feeling about what the hell's being said or whatnot. You know, like, you're arguing against empathy when you're making those sorts of points. But like, all they wanted was a grizzled white cop protagonist and a pretty lady with nice tits in their movies. And you couldn't do that because they wanted it, and you had to be shown as being against them for political points, because they were a bunch of Nazis. Well, except they weren't Nazis, at least not back then, but they're becoming Nazis now. And it is partly your fault that that's happening. whether you want to admit to it or not. And admitting to it is actually good, because then you can better strategize in the future how to not do this for a third fucking time. So, anyway, this all could have been avoided, possibly, had Hollywood been a bit more of the money-grubby, exploitative Hollywood that it had been for so long. But because Hollywood wanted to fucking virtue signal about how much they had changed, they ended up alienating people. They caused the culture to no longer view their products as cool, or their movie stars as cool. And because of that, uncool people were able to come in and canoodle a bunch of fucking dumb kids into thinking that they were actually cool. We're punk because we're anti-liberal establishment. Ha ha. Lay sigh. So I guess to crib a line from the Falcon / Captain America Falcon, do better, guys. You got to do better. Which means you got to fucking now tread a very narrow, tight rope to not alienate both sides as somebody somewhere tries to stitch this together. If our politicians aren't going to do it, all we have is our media. And, well, now you have new government obligations about the sort of things that you're being expected to make. And all that, just get it into your heads, Hollywood, that some of the people that you've invested in as stars aren't really bankable anymore. And I don't know. There really might not be any way out of this trap. You can't pivot cool back overnight after it's decided to change its mind. It's likely to then rationalize and justify why it made the decision it made, so it can pretend that the thing that it thought was cool is still cool, because it's desperate to not be seen as uncool, especially when there's money riding on the line of it. So we'll see. We'll see the tug of war in the hearts of so many influencers out there who've made these decisions. Just, next time, don't alienate your majority fucking population. What the fuck are you thinking? Like, oh, it's okay because in 70 years, we'll be 49% white in this country. Like those UN projections about like how many people are going to be alive of various groups in the future is just entirely guesswork based on if current trend lines hold perfectly till that point, not taking into account that telling a population such things will cause them to make different priorities. Also, the same people who make those projections are the same people who recently, in the last year or so, had to admit that like all their global population projections are off by up to 25 to 50%, because they've been massively underestimating rural populations, which means we thought we were just barely hitting 8 billion people, but we're actually somewhere between 10 and 12 billion people on this planet, which itself then shatters a bunch of other projections about bad things that will happen when we cross X lines, because we already crossed those lines and those bad things didn't happen. Not that bad things will never happen, but you got to stop panicking over guesswork. And telling people about it will have an effect, an impact on how things actually play out in the end. But you jumped the boat. You got, dare I say, a little too uppity. And now you're paying the price for that. And all I'm saying is just be nice to people that you want to be nice to you. Like don't tell them that fucking hot lead is rain, or that flat-chested, blue-haired women are hot. You see how goo-goo gaga these motherfuckers are over Sydney Sweeney? And she's like barely hot. She was in a jeans ad and they didn't even show off her ass. And I don't think her tits are quite as big as people seem to think her tits are. I mean, not that they're bad tits, but anyway, as Bill Hicks puts it, you want to sell Coca-Cola, have a naked woman with her legs spread holding a bottle of Coke telling you to buy Coke. Guys out there will buy Coca-Cola. And until next time,
stay crampinated.